It's great to see you all here, at least by name. I look forward to doing really the first webinar for iWalkObservation. I'm not quite sure why it's taken me so long to do some of these, but I'm looking forward to this fall doing one of these every 3 weeks. Currently have 4 scheduled, and I'll be emailing those schedules out to you all. Hope you will join for those as you have today. Before we get started, let me quickly do some kind of housekeeping things. You have at the bottom of your screen, excuse me, bottom of your screen, you will see these 3 icons, and 3 icons that will help you engage and interact in our conversation today. Though it is a webinar, I'm the only person that you'll be seeing or hearing from. You can still perhaps ask a question, throw out a chat to the group by clicking on chat. Your chat will automatically go to all participants. You can raise your hand if you'd like to get my attention. I may see that. It does appear as a pop-up in the corner, and see it most of the time. Or best of all, if you have a question about something that's being said or something that I haven't covered today, please shoot out a question in the Q&A box. I do have my Q&A box up. I am monitoring that. We'll answer those questions as we go along this morning, but of course, if I don't answer your question, I'll be sure to get to it by email or through a blog post on iWalkObservation.com. I'm realizing that I did not take a moment to at least introduce myself. My name is Kevin Crotchett. I am the single person behind iWalkObservation, which has been a passion of mine for going on 7 years. I am a school principal of 17 years, and iWalkObservation 8 years ago was something that I developed for myself. I find that narrative feedback for teachers is something that truly gets them to engage in a conversation with me as a principal, but engage with me collegially, and that's what I'm looking for. I want to engage that teacher in a coaching method. I want to talk about what we saw, what I saw, the notes I've taken, and how that relates to the students and student learning. So today, our focus is on 2 tools: keeping time and 4 corners, or narrative corners. Over the years, it's changed names. So we're gonna dive right into that and take a look at those 2 tools. Again, if a question comes up, even if it's not about those 2 tools, please click on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, ask the question. I'd be happy to answer it while we're here. All right, let me switch over to iWalkObservation, which you should now see on your screen. As we dive in, I think it's just good for the order, good for course, to just kind of quickly remind ourselves a few things about iWalk. Perhaps you're new to iWalk, or I do see some folks online today that have been using iWalk for years. There's been a lot that has changed over the last 1.5 years, a lot that has changed over 7 years. Most notable improvement is the cloud-based storage of backups and importing and sharing. The cloud storage is manual. There's a lot of reasons for me to do that, in part because I'm a one-man show, and this is basically a grassroots application. And so I do keep cloud as a manual sync. So if you are interested in backing up your data to the cloud or restoring your data to the cloud, you need to do that manually. iWalkObservation it's built in to remind you of that, of course. The other couple buttons I want to make sure that we are really aware of is the configuration button, right, which will bring us to the configuration panel. And that panel will allow us to configure all of our applications as well as some of the internal settings. And that's a really important piece to begin to explore if it's something that you haven't looked at before. Last one I'm going to look at today before we dive into keeping time is this button here, which says new, because that means that you have some new news. If you click on new, it will pop up in a web browser if you're on a computer, or if you're on a iPad, it will pop up inside iWalkObservation. That'll bring you to the news page of iWalkObservation. All right, so thanks again for joining this morning. Let's dive into one of the two tools that is the focus. As I mentioned, our focus is keeping time and narrative corners. First one I want to take a look at is keeping time. Keeping time is a tool that came to us, I'd say about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. Keeping time is all based on teacher talk and classroom grouping. You'll notice that in keeping time we have 3 boxes. Each one of these timers, if you will, can be used independently or can be used together. I can use just one section, or I can use all 3 sections. I will warn you that in my own efforts, using all 3 sections is extremely difficult. And I do find using 2 of them in, like for example, talk time, which we'll talk about in a minute, along with instructional grouping is completely something that is possible and able to follow the pace of the lesson, but trying to get all 3 of these in is really difficult. Let's look at each group or each group of timers. The talk time is simply that. Who's talking? Is the teacher talking or is the student talking? I often think about whenever I start talking about teacher talk time, I think about Zarada Hammond and a lot of her conversation about who's keeping or carrying that cognitive load. Is the teacher carrying the cognitive load or is the student? And most often, the person that is talking is the person that is keeping or carrying the cognitive load. We want those students talking as often as possible. And very, very often in a instructional setting, teachers don't realize how much they're talking. I think it's fascinating to sit down with a teacher at the end of a lesson, a 20-minute lesson, and to show them that indeed you were talking 16 minutes out of that time. And they begin to realize that their Q&As, their question and answers, or as others are really, Teachers College and others are really talking about right now, is not Q&A, but Q&D, question and discussion. Where is the discussion in your questioning? So first one is teacher talk versus student talk. The second one is grouping. How are the students grouped at the time? Are we whole group? Are we small group? Or are we in some kind of independent instruction or study? The bottom one is really about the gradual release of responsibility, and it is instructional release. And that is the teacher is modeling, the I do. The teacher and classroom are modeling together, we do. Or the release to independent work, whether that's in small group or one-on-one, the you do. So let's do this. Let's take a look. Let me change my screen for a moment. Okay. So to give us just an idea of what this looks like, we're going to pretend for a moment, just for a brief moment, that we are in a classroom. And the first thing, of course, I'm going to want to do is select my teacher. I have a slew of teachers at my school here. As you can tell, there's some famous names. Let's say we are in, that's not Joe Clark's, so let's go ahead and say it is Aaron Gruel's classroom. And as that classroom starts, remember, we can use any of these timers or all of these timers. Even though I haven't started the video, the first thing I'm going to notice is that we are instructionally in the we do section, and the grouping is whole group. But for today, I'm going to stick with the instructional setting, and I'm going to stick with talk time. So let's begin the lesson.
We're going to go through the lesson together, and we're going to see if we can figure out what buoyancy is together, and they're going to watch to see how we do that. That's all, okay? Yes, Anton? Oh, I like it. Now, Anton just said, isn't that what keeps the boat afloat? That's an excellent way of looking at it. Somebody have a little bit something different for the definition? Yes, Michael.
As you can see, as that lesson is continuing, I'm simply tapping my toggle switches as to when the teacher is talking and the student is talking.
Right. Do you guys know what he's talking about? It was in the video yesterday, right?
And right there, I might even comment that the student had not actually finished their expression, whatever it was. and the
took the
teacher
aluminum
picked up
foil
and
and
moved on.
exploded. But when Bill and I in the video yesterday, they crumbled it up into a little ball, it sank to the bottom, right? So you guys have to think about the difference of a aluminum foil boat.
Now, let me get back to just my iWalkObservation screen. Just to give you that quick little grab of what that would look like when you're in the classroom. The point, of course, is to toggle those buttons back and forth, and to simply be able to, at the end of the day, demonstrate to a teacher that in our case it was 53 seconds, but let's say it was 53 minutes, that in a coursework of one period, the teacher spoke 53 minutes and the students spoke 14. I think we would all agree that that would be something for us to talk about with the instructor, and how they could improve who's carrying that cognitive load, how the students are engaging and interacting with the instruction. Now, of course, along the way, I'm going to have been taking notes or toggling the switches for the instructional release or for the grouping. And both of these, of course, can lead to very powerful conversations with the teacher. I want to remind you that I could be choosing to take notes or take time on one or all of these. Perhaps I'm not going to take time on perhaps I'm not taking talk time at all. Perhaps I'm going to focus in on grouping. And of course, maybe if this is a formal lesson, I have received that lesson first. I've been able to read it, go over it, and I understand what time is going to be more important and provide the best feedback. I apologize that I actually, in my conversation, just cleared those timers, because what I did want to show you was what that looks like in the preview. In the preview, when you're ready to send this instructional, this narrative observation back to the teacher, the email that they're going to receive is, of course, a summary of all timers that were used. Any timer that was not used will not be, of course, added to the email. There'll be a summary of all timers that were used, and then your narrative comments to follow. I just placed one simple narrative comment, the vocabulary development that we saw was happening. Okay. That is keeping time. A powerful, more complicated than some in the sense of what you're doing when you're in the classroom, but definitely leads to very powerful narrative conversations with your classroom teacher in a debrief. Let's take a look at narrative corners. Now, narrative corners is focused on the idea that as you enter into a classroom, you are unable as a single person to focus in on multiple things at once. Narrative corners is in the hopes of narrowing your focus and keeping you focused in on exactly what it is that you want to be observing that day. When you open up narrative corners, there are 4 narrative boxes, and those narrative boxes default to instruction, evidence of planning, cultural relevance, student engagement. And of course, the idea is that you would select your teacher, and that from that, you would begin to focus in your notes as you're observing, specific to the topic that is in that box. Now, 4 topics, if you will, may not be what you want. Maybe you want to focus in on only 2, and you can certainly do that by selecting the counter over here. Again, to focus your efforts to make sure that what you're looking at is constantly reminding you, in this box, I want to write about only instruction that I see. In this box, I'm going to write about only the evidence that I see. Let me see if I have a there we go. So here's a nice example of a narrative corner that has just simply been taking narrative notes on those 4 topics. Now, what if you walk into a classroom and those 4 topics are not the topics that are important to you? Well, let's go ahead and come back out and do another narrative corner. And this time, let's say it is Jamie. And perhaps instruction is something that I do want to focus in on, but evidence of planning is not. I know that Jamie's planning is on target. It's not part of the goals. So I know that we're good with that. So maybe I want to not focus on evidence of planning, but rather I want to choose something else. Perhaps I want to focus in on classroom dialogue, or perhaps I want to look at student engagement. I can certainly do that by pulling down our pull down menu and selecting the one that I'm interested in most. Once I do that, of course, the header will change, and so will the focus of my dialogue. Now, if I had typed anything into this box and changed the box, you will notice that, of course, the text will not change itself. So really those headers, excuse me, those headers are something that you want to select as you walk in or as you sit down and before you begin to think about it. Note that you can just focus in on one single element. Perhaps that is going to work best for you, or you can go all the way to the 4 elements. Perhaps the topics that you see here are not topics that are helpful to you, but rather you would like to add some. And that, of course, happens in the configuration. Now, when we were looking at keeping time, we didn't dive into the configuration because there is no configuration for keeping time. But for most of the tools, there are customizations that can be made. And certainly with Narrative Corners, there is. There are 2 ways to get to your custom settings. One is inside the tool, you can always click on the gear, and that gear will send you over to the custom settings for that tool. The other way, of course, is from the main menu if you click on configuration. And when you click on configuration, you can now customize any of the tools from this screen. Really, the 2 uses are this use, hitting the configuration tool, is really when you're sitting down in your office, you're playing around with the tool set and you're customizing it to make it your own. The purpose of the gear is that perhaps you're in the classroom and you're noticing that there's not something here. Boy, excuse me. Perhaps you have an initiative going on in your school and you'd like to take narrative notes on that, so you want to have that listed here. You certainly could do that on the fly. You're in the classroom, you've already selected your teacher, you're ready to start taking notes. You most certainly don't want to go all the way back out, so you simply go into the configuration and edit this list. I'm going to take out those erroneous ones of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let's say I have an EBBL initiative, equity-based literacy, in my school, and so I could simply add that as a part of that list. When I go back and I take a look at my 4 corners, we're going to see that that has appeared alphabetically in the list, and so I can now use it as a header. Let's go back to that sample one I had, which I believe was Rhett Butler, and I believe it's that one. And let's take a look at what this looks like when it's in preview. The preview, of course, shows you exactly what the teacher is going to receive by email. They always receive this top message, and that's been pre-populated with for every single one of the tools, but you can change that top message however you would like, and I'll show you that in a moment. Below the top message, they're going to have the title of the tool. Information just simply that, of course, is in the email, but we're going to put it in here too, that this is to Rhett Butler, it's from me, and it was sent to you on this day. The reason why that date's changed or different is because this is a demo version, and my date is aligned to when I first made this observation. And then, of course, it's going to have the narrative corner and my narrative notes instruction. And then simply my notes about it: evidence of planning, student engagement, and cultural relevance. Okay. Some other things that I wanted to make sure that we know, I had said that we would take a look at the intro of the email. So again, every one of our tools are sent to teachers with an introduction. That introduction is controlled in the tools customization. And right here, you'll see email intro for the on task tool, and here it is. Also notice that in your customization screens, a lot of them do have info boxes, and those info boxes will allow you to learn a little bit more about this field. If you are on a computer and you notice the field gets truncated right there, you can simply expand it to see the rest. couple other things I wanted to make sure we mention, even though we were focusing on narrative corners and keeping time, just knowing that all of our tool sets, all of our tools have the same control bar at the top. That, of course, brings us back to the home menu, the main menu, brings us to the configuration or the customization for the tool. This, of course, will bring us to all of our observations that we have done thus far. And a nice thing here is if you're in a tool set and if you're in a tool, you've taken some notes and you try to move out of it, it says, wait, hold on, you've left the teacher name blank. It knows that you have started this evaluation or observation. You've left the teacher name blank, and if you move forward, you're going to delete it, or you can go back and then assign that to a teacher. So those safeguards are in there. The view all button, the photo button. If you're on an iPad or if you're on, if you're on an iPad, you can click here to add a photograph. Just click on the photo camera and your camera will pop up and you'll be able to add a photograph. If you're on a laptop, if you're on a Surface Pro, you will be able to click on either of these buttons and be able to select a photograph. Perhaps you took pictures with your camera, and perhaps later on in the office, before you send this to your teacher, you want to add photographs from the classroom lesson plan. Currently, there are 4 panels. You are able to add 4 photos with a caption to the photo if you choose. Soon, I'd say in the next 3 to 6 months, you will be able to add up to 8 photographs. This will change widely. And right now, when you send this, if we look at the preview, here's the preview to my 4 narrative corners. Here are the 2 photographs that I took. When I send this, those photographs are going to be wrapped up into a PDF and attached to the email for my teacher. Those photographs will disappear from the system, and that's a memory management reason or purpose. But moving forward, if you're on an iPad or an iPhone or even a Surface, in the next 3 to 6 months with an update, you will notice that those photographs will hang on as long as you keep them in whatever folder that you saved them. For example, on an iPad, that would be in the photo gallery. If you keep them in the photo gallery, they will still be there when you look at the observation. If you delete them from the photo gallery, they will not be there in the observation. And it'll be the same thing with Surface Pro. If you keep them in the folder where it is that you took the photograph and saved it, it will still remain. So that's something coming forward. One final thing before I take a look at questions that you may have. Right here, the minute, let me come out. Let me go back to keeping time. Let's take hold on real quick. Let's say I wanted to do keeping time on Aaron. The minute I do, I have these 2 boxes that pop up. Icons. The goals icon is something that's being developed and revamped, and you will see an update on it in the next 30 to 60 days. The goals module allows you to simply click that and see any goal statements for that teacher. This is extremely handy if you've walked into a classroom, selected a teacher, and you have 30, 60, 70 teachers in your building, and you have to remember what were their goals that they're working on instructionally. Simply pop that button down, it'll list them for you. Of course, this assumes that you've placed the goals in the system. We can take a quick look at that, even though it's outside the scope of our webinar today. The goals module is to the left of the main menu. If you're on an iPad, just simply swipe. If you're on a computer, you click on the caret, and there you have the goal setting and progress button. Simply adding, it says here that you don't have any goals in the database, select a teacher first. And so we're going to select a teacher. Here's Aaron, and click on goals. You don't have any goals for Aaron. Would you like to create one? Yes. This is my first goal for Aaron. And perhaps I add another one, and this is Aaron's personal professional goal. And as we would expect, that if I go back to an observation with Erin, and I'm in that classroom and I want to remind myself of what her goals are, that I would do so by just simply clicking the icon. The drop-down button appears, and we can see her goals. All right, and that was my daughter leaving for school. All right, so let's see. I do have a question from Carl, how to access the camera feature again. So again, what's important to remember about the camera feature is the camera feature is available on the iPad and I believe on the iPhone. Currently, taking a photograph with the Surface Pro is not available, although you can import a photograph that's on file. And taking a picture with a computer is not available, nor is it on the plans to be available. So right now, if you're on an iPad, you would simply click on photo and then click on the camera. And when you click on the camera, I'm getting a dialog box that asks me to find a file because I'm on a computer. But if you are on an iPad, you would click that camera and you would get the full camera page come up on your iPad, take the photograph, and it will insert there. Okay? All right. So that's a quick overview, but a little bit of a dive into keeping time and narrative corners. I hope this has been helpful for you. As I said, we're going to be doing, I have 4 webinars scheduled for the next couple months. They are sparse every 3 weeks. I'll be sending out an email and the likes to all, and wish you have a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, please throw them up in the Q&A box or send me an email. And have a great day. Thank you.